Tonight, I have two wonderful authors with their wonderful books here for you tonight. First one up is The Ballad of Dina Caldwell by Kate Brauning. Second, we have To Break a Covenant by Alison Ames. I have to tell you right off the bat, these two books are very chilling in their own way. Obviously, The Ballad of Dina Caldwell, revenge story, you gotta love those. And To Break a Covenant, which I have to ask you already. I know it's probably gonna be one of the questions, Kate. Is this based a little bit on Centralia, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. That's what I thought. I was like,
yes.
Ooh. When I was like going through this, like, okay, I love this. This is great. So we got thriller, spooky, perfect evening for everyone. If you all haven't already, go ahead and go to our website and order the books, because both Alison and Kate are going to be providing signed book plates for every book you order of theirs. It's wonderful. Lastly, if you have any questions that you want to ask them, go ahead and it's a little different this time. Right-hand side of the menu, you'll see a question mark bubble. That's where you can post your questions that Alison and Kate will answer. Without further ado, I'm going to bid adieu to everyone, and I'll see you towards the end of the event.
Thank you.
I'll disappear eventually. Don't mind me.
Hi, how are you? I'm so excited to finally see you.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. I finished your book last night, actually, and it kept me up way too late, and I think I've been a little scared ever since. So thank you for that.
I'm still thinking about yours too. I had such a good time with it. I just like, I love revenge.
Oh, you're so sweet. Yeah, I think it was really interesting to me to see just how you infused every single page with that looming horror. And that's like, to me, like a huge difference between thriller and horror is, they kind of hold hands, but there's such a different primary experience sometimes. And I feel like yours really highlighted that for me because it was terrifying in the best way. And I just could not put it down.
My dream. You're making my dreams come true. Thank you. Yeah. I want to talk about Dinah. It's Dinah?
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. All right. Okay. I want to talk about her and kind of her journey that she goes on, because I was talking about I did a radio show with the bookstore that I used to work at, and they were talking about like YA and why certain things seem to happen in YA and why people tend to like dismiss YA. And I was talking about how you sort of have to have this very like optimistic, like I'm the one who can fix it and I'm going to fix it. And I feel like when you get into like an adult area of your life, you stop really, like you become more capable of seeing long-term and like being more realistic about stuff. And I feel like Dinah was such a good like encapsulation of that, where she was like, okay, I'm going to fix it. Like we have a problem. I'm going to do it and I'm going to take care of it. But then she kind of had that like tempered by her newfound family, who were kind of like, okay, but let's talk about consequences. Let's talk about long-term, like, we're still going to have society after this. And so I liked the kind of melding of the traditional YA, like this one girl's going to save the world, and then kind of into like, but actually how, and then what happens after that.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Like that's something I love about YA is that, I think all ages experience this to a degree, but especially coming into adulthood, it's so volatile, right? Everything for the most part is the first time, it's the first time you're encountering a lot of these adult experiences, but without that safety net of perspective and experience that you might gain later in life. And sometimes that perspective, it can make you jaded and bitter. That's not to say that adults are any better off than teenagers when it comes to that sometimes, but I do think it makes for particularly gripping storytelling, because it's an age of like constant and inescapable change. And to me, that's like a really fascinating fabric for thrillers, because you're taking that age and you're putting it in a pressure cooker.
Mm-hmm. And it's already so much of that. And then you get
Yeah.
into any kind of higher stakes and it just becomes a powder keg.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I also think I really love it when YA puts multiple age groups together. You know, teenagers often have very close relationships with people who are not their own age,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with younger siblings and cousins and friends and, you know, adults in their circle, people from church or school or down the block. And they have these really like rich, mature relationships with those people. And I love when YA acknowledges that and can also use that in telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it comes to the end of the world.
At every point. But I loved that she had kind of the rational, like, not fatalistic, but there is a little bit of like, once you're an adult, you're like, well, I'd love to overthrow the system, but the system is gonna still I have to pay rent tomorrow. So how am I going to, you know, as much as I would like to do that, what is our realistic end goal here? And so to kind of have the like idealistic, like, no, we can do it and it's going to work. But then also to end up in her kind of like freedom fighter group with people who have experienced the world and who have kind of the benefit of hindsight and experience. And I did like also, and I said this in the email to you, but just the like consideration of people who can't join the fight or who can't bring themselves to join the fight and they support it, but like kind of exploring the ways that people get caught in a system and then aren't able to dismantle it or don't want to dismantle it, or kind of think like it's going to be a really big hassle if we dismantle it, so I'm just going to like step back and step aside. And I feel like you did a very good job of not demonizing those people unless they actively sucked, which a few of them did, but like I just really appreciated that, because I think it's very easy to, you know, and you can go to an extreme on both sides of the coin, but just like faulting people for not being willing to be on the front lines is very easy when you don't have a lot to lose. And so to kind of be in the shoes of somebody who has like children and a family and like things that they need to protect. And that's kind of the other thing of Dinah that gets tempered by everyone that she comes to view as her family, right? Is like, because at first she's like, no, it's just me. Like if I die, it's fine. Like we're going to get it done. And then everyone's like, we would actually feel bummed if you died. So let's think about ways that we can do this so that you don't die. And I liked that as well.
That's such a good way to put that. I suppose I should back up too, for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about.
We should. Yes.
I mean, to me, like the Ballad of Dinah Caldwell it's kind of a YA retelling of True Grit. It's also a story I based off of Dust Bowl Dance by Mumford & Sons. So if you're a fan of that song, this is a gender-flipped futuristic retelling of it. But nuts and bolts, a girl in the Ozarks loses her family and goes off to kill the man who did it. So it's very much like a revenge futuristic Western. But broader than that, it's kind of the story of a kind of a local good old boy who has his boot on the neck of an entire county. And what they need is revolution, but revolution is going to cost them everything they have. And so there's a lot of people in the town who are employed by this guy, or whose people are employed by this guy, or who can't afford to leave, or who have to leave because it's their only choice. And so they're just kind of existing in like this very broken system, trying to band-aid their way through the day, until, you know, Dinah comes along and she's wholeheartedly bent on revenge no matter the cost, and they really need that motivation from her. But it was very important to me that in that, the story doesn't blame anybody for not wanting to give up their families or their home or their land, because that's a cost you can't require somebody else to pay. You know, you can't decide for anybody else what's the appropriate cost, for freedom and for a future. And so Dinah's willing to sacrifice it. But the community too really has to help her realize that her own life has value as well. So I think there's a really important interplay there. And I love that you highlighted that, Alison. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I liked that a lot. There's, I don't know if you've read, it's sort of the opposite in terms of, have you read This Is Not a Test?
Yes.
Okay.
I love that book. Yeah.
That's kind of the same lesson in a very different way and coming from a very different place, but it did kind of give me that vibe of like, in This Is Not a Test, she wants to die and she can't because the zombie outbreak has happened, and so she can't jeopardize the people that she's with. Whereas Dinah's like, I'm ready to die and I don't really want to, but I will. But like the part where she like when she's going to jump off the motorcycle and doesn't, but then later when they're like discussing that, Johnny is like, if you had done that, like thinking that you were going to sacrifice yourself to save us or whatever, I also would have died. Like, because it would have unbalanced and so like just not thinking, like being so willing to sacrifice yourself that you don't really think about the consequences of that, both on like an immediate and a long-term scale. That was like very powerful to me, because when you're in that kind of headspace of like, how can I change anything? Maybe I can't change anything. Well, if I die, then at least I know I've done everything I can. And it's like, yes, but also, that was Lulu. She's here now. But just like the idea that sometimes there's strength and value in not doing everything you possibly can in a certain situation, because ultimately you like making that ultimate sacrifice is not beneficial for whatever you're trying to do in the long run. So I thought like her kind of realizing that she could be a part of the rebuilding of stuff was very, very cool and good, and kind of like finding a way forward after you have decided that you're not going to live anymore for whatever reason, like whether that's by your own choice or just because you've decided that that's like an okay outcome. Mm-hmm. And then like having to then continue on from that like punctuation mark.
Yeah. Well, thank you. YA is full of characters who are willing to die for a cause. That is not a rare thing.
Yeah.
And I love that because teenagers like are some of the most wholehearted people you'll meet, right? Like look at some of the stuff that, Gen Z and their younger siblings even now are doing. Like it's amazing. They're willing to go the distance. Mm-hmm. But not only that, I think when you have people in traumatic situations, anytime giving up your life for something is a question, we need to engage with that really like fully and honor what's actually going on. And for Dinah, she's not wanting to die in a clear headspace. Mm-hmm. She's doing this out of guilt because she feels like she should have done a different thing earlier in time. Mm-hmm. And it's penance, and it's grief. It's not clear-headed sacrifice. And so I really wanted to tackle that. And when somebody's lost everything, if you've lost your family, are you a sister or a daughter or a neighbor, or a member of the community anymore? What are you if you've lost the people you tied your identity to? And I wanted her to find that again. Mm-hmm. And I wanted her, rather than choosing to die, I wanted her to find reasons to live.
Yeah.
And when she did have to make, another sacrifice, if she did, I wanted it to be from a space of knowing what she still had to live for, rather than out of a place of regret for not throwing herself into a situation she never should have been in to start with.
Mm-hmm. Looking forward instead of backward.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
order to make that kind of a decision. Yeah, I really appreciated that. That was I really liked that. So what about the Ozarks? I know we were going to talk about, are you from there? Do you have connections? Was that just like the best place for kind of an out of the way place that maybe Amazon as a super company couldn't quite get to.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love that you bring that up because so far I'm making the book sound very dark and morbid. And it was important to me that it'd be full of music and food and dulcimers and wild animals and, all sorts of like fun and beautiful things as well. And the Ozarks is one of those things for me. I love the mountains, but my grandparents lived in the Ozarks for a very long time. I have an aunt and uncle down by Little Rock. And a very corny secret. My parents used to take us to Silver Dollar City in Branson just about every year when I was growing up. And it's like Las Vegas for homeschoolers. That's kind of my pitch for the area. It's so much fun. It's so sweet. I love it so much. And so it was always like an escape for me as a kid. And when I thought about wanting to tell I wanted to tell this futuristic Western, this Western that kind of reclaimed things, for people who've been erased.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to set it somewhere that was special to me that I knew, but also someplace that was just really fun. And so like, I love the mountains. I think they're full of texture. They're full of life. They're full of secrets. They're full of caves, which I think are just incredibly cool. And so, yeah, that's why I picked the Ozarks.
I do like that you had a friendly cave. I don't love a cave. Liz is in the chat going, Allie loves caves. And I'm like, I really strongly do not, but
I think they're so magical.
I appreciate them when they're carpeted and full of cute boys, I think would probably be that's my pitch for your specific cave, but in general, underground.
I suppose the mine and to break a covenant is considerably less friendly. Is that how you said that?
Yeah, it's like, yeah. And there was a Twitter thing going around of like, what was your weirdly region specific like field trip when you were in school? And we were in Colorado, so it's a lot of like abandoned gold rush towns and caves and like mines with elevators. Like I've been in more than one mine that has an elevator in my childhood life. And one of my agent's other clients was like, I feel like you're telling on yourself a little bit. And I was like, I didn't think I was until I said that. And now I'm like, oh, yep, probably that was something happened in there. And I was like, no, underground, not a good place to be. But I do have to say, I do love like an underwater hot spring type joint. And I don't know a lot about the Ozarks and kind of what all goes on within them, but I did think that was a very cool, like, I like when there's stuff under a cave. I don't want to go to it, but I like that it exists. And I like that he was kind of able to like harness that. Did you do a lot of research about Moonshine, or is that a thing you know of?
Oh yeah. I have had to research a lot about making Moonshine. There's kind of an underground current through the county and like a source of money that the bad guy can't get his hands on, and it's this moonshine ring, and that to me was something that I find just representative of people when they're pushed into a corner, they start finding solutions for themselves, right? I grew up a very poor kid, and the number of janky DIY stuff we did just as teenagers running far too loose and unsupervised, right? And one of those things I think is that people find ways to make money. They just do, or to provide for themselves in the way that they can. And Moonshine has always been that for people, in rural America.
Well, that was my thought as well, is that it was like a very specific thing that you chose to have be the kind of the underground currency, which I like, because I do feel like that's very like region specific, but also it has such a connotation of, Moonshine is like Prohibition era. Like it's like you're the underneath guy trying to still make stuff happen. So I did love that. But yeah, kind of witnessing that process through Dinah's eyes was very fun for me, because I've been to the Coors factory. That's what we have. So the Coors factory and the tea factory. That's what we have.
doing the research for distilling was super fun, and I did get to tour some distilleries. That was really cool. And then figuring out how to downsize it and make it something teenagers could do.
Right.
or
That's
part of their own self-sufficiency, was a really fun.
And I do love the like future vision of like it's not quite the Hunger Games, it's not quite Mad Max, but the idea that you would write a YA set in the future that isn't like everything's glittering and hover cars and high tech, which like I do love those things, but this feels like I didn't even realize until the date was specifically mentioned. Like I figured we were just very, very rural. And so maybe we weren't talking about cell phones or whatever. And then you specifically said what year it was. And I was like, hang on. And then kind of from there, we got more of that unfolding of like Tyson Deere and Amazon are now in control of all of the industry and there's not enough jobs and everything has been automated, but also there are still places that have slipped through the cracks. And like that felt very real to me in a way that was kind of, I don't know, the whole thing just felt very like grounded in reality in a way that I really appreciate, even for being like a thriller and for being kind of a like a thematic sweeping Western type thing. Like it felt very much like, we're not quite at the Hunger Games where you can't even see the remnants of society as you recognize it. You're at the midpoint of like, maybe if we do something now, we don't get to the Hunger Games, which I love.
Well, yeah, thank you. I really love apocalyptic fiction too. I love, fate of the world, end of the world type stories, dystopias too. But I sometimes think the scariest apocalypse is the one that just comes one day at a time, right? There's no bomb, there's no invasion. That's my new puppy.
Oh, puppy.
And so I wanted to write a type of future that was better for some people and a lot worse for other people, and I feel like poor people, small communities, ones that corporate America doesn't really get all that much out of, they sometimes get left alone, they get swept aside, for better or worse. And in this book, a little bit better, although systemically not, right? Because what other option do they have? But they have been able to make this little haven where they're pretty much unnoticed by the powers that be. And that's part of why they are able to change things. So they kind of use being useless to other people, to their own advantage. And I wanted to write like, what would happen if you were forgotten by the apocalypse, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and it takes a while. It does take a while to realize that like we're not just in like rural farm community. I mean, it pretty quickly escalates when Gage shows up, but the idea that it's more than like this one guy who lives in town is kind of a dick, and then you see like how far his tentacles have spread. I like a small big bad. I like a big bad, but I also like a manageable big bad. And I feel like that's a very like one day at a time apocalypse is just like, that's exactly what it feels like we're doing right now. So that is a painfully timely sentiment.
Yeah, parts of it.
It's harder, and it's harder to resist that. Like if it was one big thing, you could be like, well, today the aliens are coming, so we're all going to go stand on our lawns and like fight them or whatever. But if it's one day at a time, you're just getting sort of worn away very slowly. It's much harder to, which is probably the reason that they do it that way, is because it's harder to say no.
Yeah. It's almost like an abusive relationship, right? It's just a little bit more insidious. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's only become more true and I think more clear to me, like, as I started writing this book several years ago, and some of the what ifs have just become a little bit nearer and dearer since then.
Yeah. And, You're like, oh, this was so far-fetched when I first thought of it.
Yeah.
In the past. Yeah. I don't do a lot of human monsters, I think, because I get real heavy-handed with it. like I'm like, this rich man is evil, and everyone's like, all right, like you may step down from your soapbox. But Gates felt very real to me in a very like, I don't know, it just like the way that he talked and the way that people talked about him felt very much like talking to people now about people in power that have a lot of money. And it was like frustrating in that same way, but also like you understand why people do it, and you understand, you know, like if you're not underneath the boot, if you're like adjacent to the boot, you're like, oh, it's pretty, you know, I'm not getting actively crushed, so it can't be as bad as you think it is. Like maybe you just think it's really bad and it's actually okay, and then you're just waiting for the boot to step over a tiny bit, and Cole has to confront that in kind of a terribly real way. And most of us, I think, will not get there in our lifetimes, I hope. But
yeah, I had so much fun writing Gates as the villain, just because I wanted to, like, what if the evilest man in the world lived right down the street, right?
mm-hmm.
And what if the main evil thing about him was just that he did not care,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And what if through not caring, he pretty much was the only money in town? You know, I've known people where there's shades of that in them, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or that really was them. They just weren't in quite the same position. And to me, that's almost, again, like the apocalypse that comes one day at a time. You know, the guy down the street holding, you know, your life in his hands
Right.
is scarier to me in some ways than it's so much more, it's closer to home, right?
Yeah,
And
literally.
yeah.
It is interesting though, because that then also makes him more the conceivable like figure that you could fight. You know what I mean? Which again, the small big bad, I'm like, he's right down the street and he's right there and he could do whatever, but also you're right down the street and you can,
Yeah.
like, you know, where he's like a physical, it's like when you see like a celebrity, like whenever I think about the fact that Taylor Swift is like a normal sized person who could like sit on my couch in my living room, I'm like, no, she's too big. Like she's gigantic. She's Taylor Swift. Like she can't fit in my living room for normal sized people. And I feel when there's a big bad like that, or like a corporation or some kind of like overarching huge thing, it becomes much less reasonable to think about like fighting it. But when it's just a guy, like no matter how evil he is, and I do think that Dinah has that realization as well. She's like, you are the worst man and you are a terrible man, but you're just a man. Like,
Yeah.
which
That was something that I really wanted to deal with, was kind of disempowering evil, you know, and showing that for all the impact and pain it can cause, it really is a very small, you know, kind of, it's a very small kind of helpless thing when you are your best self. And, you know, it's one thing that Gates says to her is, you know, when he's kind of mocking her, is that the angel of death is not a teenage girl. And to me, the whole theme of the book is, oh yes, she is.
Absolutely she is, and we'll prove it right now.
Yeah. I wanted to really give that power to a young woman, especially in a Western, especially in, you know, for a queer young woman to be able to take all that power that naturally is hers, you know, and have her kind of find that deity and that power and that community in herself, you know. And even though her community's there to support her, like without her, this would not have happened.
Right.
So I love like giving her the stage and just letting her see what a monster and what a healer and what a source of love and what a source of destruction she could be all at once. So she makes some real mistakes in that book.
Yeah. But that's also being 17 and like in a situation where it's not life and death, you kind of have the luxury of being like, I've got a plan and I'm going to do the plan. And then, you know, it doesn't go well, but it's like bangs. It's not like murder.
Yeah.
And so like she's the spark that kind of catalyzes all of them, but then they are, I don't know, I guess like a longer fuse for the spark or something like that, where it becomes a more controlled, like focused, purposeful explosion at the end.
Well, I really love that you mentioned that, because the first version of the story was very much vigilante justice.
Yes.
You know, it was following much more like classic Western tropes, and I loved it, you know. But then I started thinking about what do I want to say about vigilante justice and revenge? Like, what healing do they bring? You know, and if they don't, what do I want to say about that? You know, what kind of story am I handing this girl on the stage that, you know, queer young women, queer people, you know, to say nothing of people of color, just don't get in the Western space. And so I had to like really rethink and completely redraft the book and revise and to try and get to a place where I felt like I was actually exploring what I really wanted to say, which was, you know, that revenge is not the whole picture, and anything you pursue out of pain is really not going to bring healing. And but I still needed to let her have a piece of revenge there, because that is her story. And so trying to figure out how to turn revenge into grassroots revolution was really just such a fun and exciting, but also really thought-provoking process for me. So like that, you know, that community there where she does find her like grassroots revolution, to me is the healing piece. And that any justice you pursue just on your own can by definition not be justice. And so I wanted the story to find some piece of justice, and to do that they had to do that together.
Yeah. There's actually, I have opened the question tab, and that actually goes perfectly with the first one, which says, were there any parts of your book in progress that had to get cut that you wish made it into the final product? So maybe some vigilante stuff that didn't end up fitting, but
yeah, there's some I think pretty dark scenes where I just let people have the revenge that they wanted, and it ultimately wasn't right for the book. It was fun to write, but it wasn't right for the book, I think. And some of that was just in me wanting to figure out, you know, what I had to say about this stuff. Also, Johnny originally had a point of view. And this was originally a 2 point of view book. And in, you know, really revising my way into it, I figured out, you know what, no, this really is just her story, and I need to let her have that stage. But I also think that really helped his character development, because I got to take, you know, 50,000 words of his point of view and turn him into a character where we never actually got to see inside his mind. We just got to see his point of view from outside him, which was a really interesting writing exercise, but also I think made him very real to me.
Kind of seeing him through the lens of the person that you are filtering everything through the lens of.
Well, how about you? Did you have to cut anything that you really wish had gotten in there?
I eventually, the second half of the book became a different book. And originally it was much more of like a jawbreaker type situation where they accidentally killed their friend and it was a haunted town. And so that was kind of the result of the haunting. And so all of that went away, which I don't miss it at this point because I think we got it where it needed to be. But they did go to prom, which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed writing and like dress shopping and like, you know, sort of the vision of prom where you go with your friends and it's not secretly sad like it was for me. Like, so that was my, like, describing everyone's prom looks. Like, I don't really get into a lot of like fashion discussion or anything like that most of the time, but I really went hard for prom. So I do miss that. But aside from that, I think I don't regret anything being gone, and prom is just for me. So
I love a good prom.
It was great. It was under the sea themed, I think. I now can't remember. I just remember Lacey was wearing like an Ice Queen outfit and she had like white mascara and stuff. And she looked like a beautiful alien. And I was so proud of her.
Really into the idea of horror prom.
Horror, but right? It would have been,
Right?
and obviously, you know, things continue to be scary in the in the prom. So we have a good time, we have a bad time, we dance, we scream. This one, well, I don't know if you've done, so you have one before this one.
Yeah.
Was that also a thriller?
You know, How We Fall was my debut. That's my first book out, and it's a romantic suspense, which I have since come to discover is not really a thing in YA. So, you know, there's like books tend to like be mostly one with a little bit of the other, and this is much more of a true blend. And that's the book that kind of helped me figure out how much I love writing thrillers. Like I got a taste of it with the suspense and I was like, oh no, I'm not looking back. This is what I do now. So yeah, I love that about that book because it really did kind of show me what I really want to write in the future.
Okay. Well, so I will, I guess, answer this one first because I'm not quite sure it applies, but it says, have you ever spooked yourself while writing your own books? So I'll answer that and then expand it, I guess. I don't find anything that I do to be scary enough. And I have friends that are like, oh, I cried when I wrote this scene or I reread this scene or whatever. And I love that. I've never had that reaction to anything that I've done. Like mostly I'm like, if I have a joke that I think is funny, I'm like, I'm like, good for me. Like, but that's just for me. That's not like a real. But I think the problem is that if I were presented with something that I had done and I somehow was hit on the head and didn't remember it, I might be like, oh, that's frightening and I don't care for it. But like, because it's from my own brain, I'm like, whatever, do better. So I've never scared myself. I would like to. I feel like that's the goal. But I guess, have you ever had any kind of like strong emotional reaction to the stuff that you're creating?
All the time, way too often. I probably have way too many emotions about my books. Like I tend to like put myself into those situations and epically relate to it. So like if I'm writing a scene where like one of my characters is crying, I was probably crying writing it, you know, and I'll show it to my spouse and be like, look at this, isn't it so sad? And he'll be like, it's a pretty normal sentence, Kate. Like, yeah, it's a bummer, but you know, cheer up. And I'm like, no, but they're so sad. So like,
you don't understand how much they're feeling.
Yeah. So it must be wonderful to be more like you, where you know you're just this impervious mountain, terrifying all the little people below.
That's what I'm hoping. I think the problem is I end up like I over correct because I'm like, oh, I don't think it's that scary. And then like my poor sweet copy editor who gets hired, you know, per book and doesn't know what she's signing up for and doesn't specifically want to do horror. And then she's like, here are your copy edits. I had nightmares. Goodbye. Like
I legitimately wondered while reading your book if you were a psychologist. I'm sitting there reading, I'm like, how does she know how to do this? How does she know this much about disassociation? That's not fair.
I've just consumed so much horror, and I think so much of it is based in trauma and like viewed through a trauma lens that I think I'm going to say that my subconscious knows more and is more intentional than my conscious brain, because most of the time I'm just like, what's scary? And then I'm like, underground. And then, you know, whatever else goes from there. But I definitely feel bad about how much I enjoy when people are scared. But that's like, I feel like that's a metric that I understand of enjoyment. So like if I wrote something like, I'm gonna swear, I hope that's okay. For the youths, if we have youths, I'll censor. One of my favorite comments to get on like fan fiction is just like, screw you. Mm-hmm. Like I think that's how you know that you did a good job. I feel like there's not an equivalent of that for like books that aren't specifically strictly horror. So when somebody's like, I have nightmares, I'm like, great. That is a measurable, like, I feel good about that. And I'm sorry that that happened to you, but that's how I know. So that's kind of my, like, my metric. And so I've never had a nightmare about my own stuff, but I've had nightmares that I have later used. So I don't know if that counts, but
Well,
those
it works. Let me tell
those
you.
came from my brain technically, and they were horrifying. So
That'll do it.
okay, who was your favorite character to write, and who were they inspired by?
Oh,
If
man.
they were inspired by anyone.
Oof. In this book, I really think it was Dinah. I had heard a biblical story a long time ago from the Old Testament about a character named Dinah who was assaulted, and then all the men of her family went out and avenged her and whatnot, and she's pretty much erased from her own story. You know, the actors are all the men, and she's only the one who received trauma. And I just grew up thinking, that's not right. That's so weird. That's not right. And so when this title came to me, I thought that was perfect because I wanted to write a story where Dinah saved herself and Dinah got her own revenge. And that really has stayed, you know, ever since I was little when I had the idea for this book, like that has stayed the heart of this story. And so I think that just very consistent, hard-bitten, like through line for her made her so much fun to write. How about you?
I feel like Lacey is probably my favorite to write just because she's the way that she is. And I find her fun, but I think I was most intrigued by writing Nina just because I fundamentally don't get her. Like she's just very practical and like no nonsense and like just getting stuff done and not having to freak out about it. And I'm just not at all that type of person. And I don't know one specific person like that. So I think she's kind of an amalgam of like all of the people I admire who are just sort of focused and competent and like have an aspect of like gravitas about them that I don't necessarily have. But Lacey, I think Clem is just me. I mean, it's we've all got main character syndrome, but I wrote that book for so long and so much in first person that it really couldn't have been anything except for me after a certain point because my brain just wouldn't allow it. But Lacey's very like, you know, twirling and twirling and twirling and kind of drifting around, but then also this like level of darkness and, you know, because she's the one who like tells them about the covenant and about like why you make a blood promise and blood and like what it means if you break that promise. And so she's like, I like the contrast, I guess, the dissonance of like, she's so floaty and fun, but then she's also like, let me tell you about death and what it feels like. And you're like, oh no. So she was probably my most fun that I had. Cause also I can get away with like, there's a lot of stuff that she can say that like most of the characters would not say. And if she just sort of like floats in and does it the right way, I can get away with it. So
yeah, I love that. She had this like just very, very cool, like dangerous wispy vibe that was so fun.
Yes. I like a dangerous wisp. I do.
Mm-hmm.
I do unfortunately have a fondness for a dangerous wisp. When creating a world for your books, what do you first look for to include in them? Well, these are good.
Yeah, that's an excellent question.
Creating worlds.
I like to figure out, I start out with what's the same and what's different a lot of the times. You know, I like to have the story feel very real and very now, even if there's things about it that are shockingly not now, you know, or very much not real as we know it. But then I also really like to look at, like, what are the forces that shaped that world? You know, where's the money? Where's the religion? Where's,
Right.
you know, where is nature right now? What's it doing? Who's the power in the community? Who's the power in the family? And look at all of those different layers that are, because that tends to be what frames people's lives and makes normal feel normal so much. But then it's also often what causes the problems.
Right. I like that. I like backtracking from, like, if this is the society that I want, like, how did it become this? Which is not always as addressed as you want it to be. I feel like in any kind of, like, future or other world. Sorry, I'm rolling around. I usually start with the scary thing. So in this case, obviously it was the mine and the town around the mine, and we're like 2 blocks from the hospital. I don't know if that was audible, but it's right there. But having the town next to the mine and above the mine, and then, like, why would that happen and what is happening as a result of that? So backtracking, I guess, in kind of a way, but then also, like, for the one that's coming out next, I was like, Antarctica. And I was like, okay, I want it to be in Antarctica. What's scary in Antarctica? So that's kind of that was one of the few times that I didn't, like, start with the monster or whatever. Like, in that case, I was like, okay, it has to be in this specific place. How do I get them here? What is the thing that's here with them? So it depends, but I do like the idea of, like, you start where you want them to be and then figure out how to construct it in such a way that it makes sense that they're there.
When does this new book come out?
September, I think, unless supply chain happens. But they gave me the jacket for the arc, and it says September 13th. So we're going to say that that's when it is, unless something changes.
That sounds amazing. Can we know what it's about other than scary things in Antarctica?
Yes. So I saw a thing, and this is there was a very brief thing on the internet that I saw, and it was like, Airbnb is sponsoring a research trip to Antarctica, and you pay to go to Antarctica with Airbnb to do climate research. And it was the weirdest thing. Like, I was like, I stared at it for such a long time because I was like, Airbnb, and then you're paying Airbnb, and then climate. Like, I just couldn't process any of it. And I was like, this is bananas for so many reasons. But then I was like, okay, well, maybe this is how you get some teens to Antarctica. And I do want to do a thing in Antarctica because I love it, but also it's such a good, like, isolation. Like, I feel like space and, like, the deep ocean and, like, the poles have kind of the same, like, nothingness horror element. Obviously, The Thing is, like, a very classic. It has a lot of shades of The Thing. But basically, these teams, they go to the Antarctic, and it's sponsored by a large tech company. And when they get there, they find something that wants to kill them, and and then they have to live. So the main girl is my little anxiety baby, as I like to call her, and she's got, like, real bad panic attacks, and she just is really, like, she's coming to this from a place of, like, she had a panic attack at school. She knew she had anxiety, but she didn't know how bad it was. And she had a panic attack, like, in public, like a bad one. And her friends kind of didn't know what to do with her. And her parents didn't really know what to do with her. And so she kind of is, like, isolating, and then figures out a way to, like, externalize that isolation, and is like, Instagram, sponsored post. And she's like, I guess I could go to Antarctica? Like, why not? So but she's then coming to it from a place of like not trusting her self and her feelings and her brain, because she's just had this very traumatic, like, my body and my brain are betraying me in public in a way that I didn't know they could, and I can't control. And so she's like, I feel like something's weird here and maybe something's wrong. And then she's like, but maybe not, because anxiety is a liar, you know? So she's like trying to talk herself out of it. And then it becomes clear that it's not something that she can talk herself out of. And then it sort of goes from there. There's a rat who is her friend. This one there's less like inside jokes with myself in this one, but there's enough of them that I was like, why am I doing so much comedy in the middle of like, there's an extended sequence involving the lobby song from the movies. The like, let's all go to the lobby. Like, I was like, what's the funniest thing that could be happening in her brain while she's trudging through the blizzard? I was like, I know. So that's what that is. Do you have anything coming up? Is this what's happening for you for a while, or?
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I am in the middle of a couple things that I can't talk about yet.
Ooh, we like those though, because that means there's paperwork.
They're very much this world and not this world, and they're very life and death, and they're very romancy, and there's cool animals and possibly a zombie. We'll have to see, you know, so stay tuned for that.
Very exciting. I want more wolf. I want a feature wolf.
Oh, thank you.
She was great. I love just a casual, small nature interaction. Okay, oh Lord, what is some of your best advice to a struggling teen? Oh, teens, I love you so much.
Yeah.
I feel like if I were going to give any advice to teens, it would just be trust yourself, but also don't be afraid to ask for help and to trust other people. Like, once they've proven to you that you can trust them, like, yeah. But just talk to other people. Like, it's so tempting to just assume that nobody will ever understand anything and no one can relate, and et cetera, and like keep everything right here, and then one day you die. But like, if you communicate as best as you can.
Yeah.
Was that coughing or smashing?
On my end?
Was it something? I just heard a very jarring.
Probably, that's my dog trying to open the back door. We have a lever handle, and she stands up on her hind feet and paddles it.
Oh, sweet baby. Yeah. So smart.
I know. Way too smart.
She knows how the handles work. We used to live with a cat like that. Our old roommates, he's a Russian blue, and you know, they love to fetch and stuff, and they're very smart. And he understood doorknobs, and he understood that he could not use them, and he would still try, because everything was like a knob, like a round knob, right? And he would like take both of his paws and like try, like he knew what was supposed to happen, and it was just because he didn't have thumbs that he couldn't do it. And I'm just like, if they ever figure it out,
oh yeah, they'd run the world.
It's a good thing she's smaller.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a big question, is, you know, what would you say to a teen who's struggling? I think it would be similar to what I would say to anybody, you know, who's struggling, is that, you know, your emotions are real. They matter. How you feel matters. Medication and therapy are good. You know, if your body doesn't make it on its own, store-bought's fine, right?
Yes.
You know, so like, depending on what you're struggling with, it doesn't have to be that hard. But also, you're not the only one. You know, like I went through a very tumultuous childhood. There's a lot of domestic abuse and violence involved, and I can tell you it gets better. And you can, you know, take those reins and change your life and start making the life that you want happen. You know, it can take time, and it can take, you know, different pieces of your life falling into place. But, you know, find the things that work for you, and, you know, believe your own happiness matters, and that, you know, the world needs you, and that you're valid and wonderful how you are. But yeah, it doesn't have to be this hard. And there are people who want to help you, and there are ways, you know, that can make it not have to be so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And read, you know, I found so much help in reading.
Yes.
Perfect. I figured, you know, especially time-wise, that's the perfect question to leave it off of. Alison, Kate, thank you so much. This was a really interesting event. Thank you so much for coming and doing this for us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, everyone, if you haven't already purchased your own copy of To Break a Covenant or The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell, I messed that up in the beginning. See, I told you to. I mess up names.
You got our names though. So
I got your yes, that's a good portion. So yes, if you haven't already, if you go ahead, there's actually now a link below. This is by Books. You'll also get signed book plates by both Alison and Kate for your purchases. And don't forget, I also put it in the chat earlier. You can pre-order now. It Looks Like Us, which we have it in the system as September 30th. But like also Alison said, who knows with the paper shortage stuff if that's going to hold? But let's hope, right?
That's a good note. I'll check on that. Sometimes here so far.
And lastly, for you both, where can people find you on social medias?
Ooh, go ahead.
I'm at 2 Furiosa, so number 2 Furiosa, like from Mad Max, and also
Awesome.
Too Fast, Too Furious. I haven't adapted a professional handle yet because I'm again a full nonsense person. So Kate, I'm pretty sure yours is something much more dignified.
Well, I wish it was less dignified because yours is way too cool. Mine is just my name. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook author page. It's all at Kate Brauning.
Excellent. Oh, and thank you, Liz.
Nice.
I
Thank
see
you,
you're
Liz.
putting them down there. And thank you, Kai. You also did the same. With that, everyone, I'm going to wish you all a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you at our next virtual event.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.